Well, hello, Thrive Church. We are so glad to have you here with us today. My name is Judah, pastor here at Thrive, and we welcome you wherever you are watching, whether you are in one of our physical locations, whether you're watching online, one of our senior centers, on TV, on our podcast. We are so grateful for you. We're so grateful also for your generosity. So many have chosen to give generously to the church. You know, in John 3:16, it says, "For God so loved the world that he gave." And this is an attribute of God, his generosity. And we get to reflect that generosity back to him by giving generously. And so we invite you to do so. If God puts it on your heart, you can give at any of our lobbies in the box. You can give online or on Venmo. And we are so grateful for all of you who do contribute to the work that's going on here. Every life that's changed and transformed, you played a part in that. Well, some people have been wondering where I've been lately. Some people have been asking if I'm sick or if I'm okay. I'm doing great, but I'm taking some time off over the summer to spend some time with my family, to spend some time studying and seeking God for his direction, his guidance for our church. And so as a result, we've been able to have some great people speak and bring forth the word. And I am very excited about that, excited about the people who have preached so far and who are going to be preaching. And we're in this series called Mind the Gap, where we are talking about the gap from the promise to the fulfillment. And a lot of us, we're in that gap time. We feel like God is going to do something with us. We feel like God is directing us, calling us somewhere, but we're just kind of in that no man's land. And so today we have a special guest. His name is Stanley John. I've known Stanley for many decades now, and I've heard him speak numerous times. He always has a fresh insight on God's word. He's one of the more interesting people that I know, and so I'm very excited for the word that he has prepared to deliver today. So will you please help me to welcome to the stage Stanley John?
All right. It's so good to be here. We are going to try and take off from where we left off last week. We're talking about minding the gap. Again, it's all about what God is doing with us from the time he puts us where we are and brings us to a position where he wants us to accomplish something. Today, we're going to talk about David. He's a favorite character in the Old Testament. He's in fact mentioned in the New Testament many times because it says the lineage of Christ comes from David. And that's how important this king is. So we look at his life and see what's going on and how we can make sure that we understand what he is trying to tell us today. So let me give you a little bit of background about the time that we're talking about David. Israel as a nation, they rejected God and said they wanted a king. Before that, God was their king. God provided for them, took them from place to place. He led them, the cloud of fire, pillar of fire, cloud by, he had all these miraculous things that he did. But yet the nations looked around and said, look, every other nation has a king. We don't, we want a king. And so they rejected God. And God said, fine, go ahead. We'll give you a king. And he put Saul as the first king for them. He chose Saul and put him in place. And Saul was head and shoulders above everybody. He was really good. But unfortunately, he disobeyed God. And that was it. So God rejected Saul. And we'll pick it up here in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 1. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I'm sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king." That's where we are starting. This is how I want to introduce where we are with David. So before I go on, as a healthcare provider, one of the things we do when we visit patients or interact with patients, we do what's called a BIMS. Have you ever heard of that? BIMS? It's called a brief interview of mental status. Just want to know what your mental capacity is. We like to know that of our patients. So what we technically do in that test is we tell them 3 words. It's usually blue, sock, and bed. We tell them and we ask them to repeat that to us, and they say blue, sock, and bed. And then we go about our business, taking care of them or something, and somewhere in between we'd ask that question again. What were those 3 words I told you? So I'm going to do that with you guys today. I've got 4 words. Obedience. Can you say that back? Obedience. Trust. Sovereign God. All right. The test has started. All right. So we are at 1 Samuel 16:7. It says, the next verse that I'd like you to take to is 1 Samuel 16:7. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or height. This is because Samuel came to the house of Jesse, had all his sons come around, and Samuel looked at Eliab, the big, I think he's the oldest kid, and he said, oh, this surely must be the next king. And God says, hang on, Samuel, don't consider his appearance or height, for I have rejected him. This is an important line he says here. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. This issue of the heart is important. I think, it's so easy for us to just look around and make decisions and judgment based on what we see. But God, He looks at the heart. He looks at things that we cannot see. And so it's so important for us to consider things when we make decisions. What is God thinking about? He is looking at the heart. So 1 Samuel 16:13 says, so Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Underline that. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. And then it says Samuel went back to Ramah where he lived. When this was happening, David was 17 years old. Some places say 15, but most agree he was 17 years old. At 17 years old, he got anointed as king. And this whole thing about anointing, they poured the oil on him. Imagine this David, he's out there tending sheep because that's what we're told he was given to do. He's out there tending sheep, and he wasn't even invited to this sacrificial ceremony because when they first looked for him, he was out tending sheep. So they called him in. And then Samuel pours his oil on him, and they all pack up and they leave. So David's like, what now? Got this oil on me. Things went back to normal. He didn't suddenly become king. He didn't sit on a throne the moment the oil was on him. In fact, he went back to shepherding. That's what he was given to do. It says in Acts chapter 13, verse 22. This is Paul later on in the New Testament. He's referring back to the Old Testament. He says, after removing Saul, he made David their king. God testified concerning him, I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. Here's what's important. He says, he will do everything I want him to do. That's God's definition of David. He's a man after my own heart. He will do everything I want him to do. It's interesting to see how God connects obedience to your love for him. He will do everything I want him to do. That's what God talks of David and says, this is the person I've chosen. He is not very tall. Some describe him to be about 5 feet 3 inches. He's not a big statured guy like Saul, the predecessor, was, but he was big in his heart for his love for God. And he says he will do everything I ask him to do. In your notes, if you're taking it, an obedient heart attracts God's delight over you. Do you want to have, the movie Fellowship of the Rings or Tower of the Rings, that whole series? There's that ring or that guy, Sauron, I guess, his eyes on something like, burns them down. That's in a negative way, but in the positive sense, if you obey God, God's eyes are on you. He's looking at you and beaming with delight. Obeying God should be a priority that we can take in our lives. So when we look at David's life, he's anointed with oil and he goes back. Let's just also look at David. I believe to start with, he wasn't treated well within the family. David is the author of many Psalms. And one of the Psalms he writes, Psalm 27:10, he says, though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. Then he says in Psalm 69:8, I'm a foreigner to my own family, a stranger to my mother's children. So we get a sense that, David wasn't necessarily treated very well within his family. In fact, when he was out, when he was sent out to watch the sheep, shepherding was usually meant for servants. It wasn't something for the family member, but that's where he was placed. God realized that to get to David's heart, he had to put him in this position of humility. Now, it's easy for us to look at this years later and say, wow, David was on the throne. He was the best king for Israel. But while he was going through that period in his life, what we'd like to mention, the gap, it was tough. Imagine being told by your family, just go do something so menial that even the servants are sometimes saying no. But that's where David was placed. David faced rejection from his family, but he found his identity in the God of Israel. Isn't it encouraging to know that even when we face rejection from loved ones, people that we may not expect to, that God still sees us and pursues us? He has not left you at that moment. God intentionally places us in our surroundings for his glory. It's worth noting that David went back to being a shepherd, and as he was being prepared for this role as a king, it's approximately 20 years later that he becomes a king. God was preparing him, and he was learning to be faithful in the small things. Being a shepherd, it's not a very, high-tech job. You're really watching sheep, chasing them down, yelling at them, bringing them together, finding them place to, their most stubborn animals, I'm told. And that was his job, just shepherding them, moving them from place to place. But that's what David did after his anointing. He went back to the daily, simple, mundane tasks, learning to be humble while doing the task. Has God called you something in your life? You feel like there's a calling and God is preparing you for something? Just realize most often it's not that you're immediately projected and promoted to that position. There is this period of learning to wait on God. Part of his journey, it says in your notes, leadership begins long before the title. As part of his journey to the crown, it involved spending time with God, seeing him in the day-to-day events, not looking for God in like the fire, an earthquake, or a wind, but finding God in your simple moments of life and being grateful for it. As a shepherd, David wrote all these Psalms that we later read. He looks at the stars and he wonders about God. He saw God in things around him. He writes, when I look at the heavens and the stars and the moon in its place, why do you even think of me? That's what David writes in the Psalms. And then he goes on to say much later, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. These verses or these, statements were not him sitting on the throne and writing it. It was him shepherding in a very humble position and realizing that God is a shepherd. He sought God, learned the heart of God, knew who God was, and David recognized God's handiwork around him. He also saw God in him. He later writes in the Psalms, you have woven me in my mother's womb. You've knit me together. You've put me together. David realized that who he was and where he was because God wanted him there. He could have said, I'm not tall like my brothers. I'm not looking very handsome, whatever. Instead, he realized that God had made him just the way he needed to be. Later on, he's also seeing God in others. So he sees God around him. He sees the creation. He looks at the stars and simple things that he's surrounded by. He sees himself and says, I'm God's handiwork. And then later on, you'll see he sees God in others because he has an opportunity to, kill Saul, but he wouldn't touch him because he says, that is God's anointed person. So your walk in my life, our life, making sure that we take time to see what's around us. Simple moments, simple day to day tasks. How is God in this? If you look for Him, you will find Him because He is there with you. I think the devil's strategy most often is to keep us so distracted from what he's trying to show us that we're looking for these big events in our life, when we turn around and become something different. But you're missing the moments that God is meeting with you. Wake up in the morning, and say, like he writes, in the morning I will sing of your love, because he knows that God is with him every moment. In your notes, David's primary identity was his relationship to God. David's identity in loving God and being applauded by God. He sought him in the morning, and he wrote of his creation, and he learned humility, patience, and God's faithfulness, being a shepherd. So I've kind of put this into a few phases. One is the shepherding phase. David got anointed and was a shepherd, and he stayed a shepherd. And then he has a few other phases that we'll touch, as we go along. In Psalm 27:13, he says, I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And then he writes again in Psalm 143:8, let the morning bring me word of your unfailing love, for I've put my trust in you. Show me the way I should go, for to you I entrust my life. These are all words not from a king, but from a person who is out in the fields at night and in the day, shepherding things around. David's implicit obedience of God grew his trust, and he experienced the sovereignty of God. All right. What are those 4 words I asked you to remember? Awesome. This will be an underlying foundation for you. If anything you forget, if you don't remember anything else today, when you leave this place, know that obedience and trust because of a sovereign God. Everything that happens to you is with God's knowledge. This is what's happening in David's life. So this whole gap that he's going through, he's learning to obey, he's learning to trust, and because of that, he's realizing that God is a sovereign God. My wife introduced our family to a life principle some time back. She said it, the audience of one. Meaning, do everything in your life as if it's to one person who's watching you. It doesn't matter everybody else around you. It doesn't matter who's looking at you. Your actions and your steps should be to the audience of one, and that is God. And if you can build that as a principle in your life, then things don't matter. You will do what you need to do because God has asked you to do it. The next stage we see is David enters into Saul's service. Saul, in 1 Samuel 16:19 and 21, it says, then Saul sent messengers to Jesse, the father, and said, send me your son David, who is with the sheep. And David came to Saul and entered his service. Saul liked him very much, and David became one of his armor bearers. So what's happening in the background here is the Spirit of God, which I think I asked you to underline, came upon David at the anointing, right? That same Spirit left Saul as a king. The Spirit of God left Saul, and he was being bothered by evil spirits. So when he was in this state of distress and terrible depression or whatever anger that he was going through, someone said, send for David. He knows how to play the lyre. It's like one of those stringed instruments. And he said, that may comfort you. So he sent for David. He came, entered Saul's service. And every time Saul was going through this state of fit and anger, David would come and play this lyre, which is, I guess, an instrument that he would play, and he would calm him down. So Saul got to like David very much. Although Saul tried to kill David multiple times, he continued to be loyal because God had asked him to work for him. So This is another thing that we need to keep in mind. God takes us through these phases which we may not understand why. And later on, you'll see what happened because he entered Saul's service. You see how that came into play for him. But God moved him from one place to the other. Right now, he's in Saul's service. He's playing and he's becoming the armor bearer for Saul. This is the next stage that we go to. It's a warrior, a military hero. That's the next phase that David was taken into. Maybe you've heard of this story a few times, the story of David and Goliath. Yep. A common reference, usually, it's good versus evil. It's a reference to an underdog, because Goliath was about 9 feet, 6 inches, they say, and David was about 5 feet and something, and these guys were fighting each other. I think we've heard of the story, but I want to bring a point up here. Do you know what gave David the confidence to fight Goliath? Let's read this in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 32 to 37. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant," meaning David, "will go up and fight him." Saul replied, "You're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a young man, and he's been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, this is interesting, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep." Here we go, back to the shepherd days. "When a lion or a bear came and carried a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Those shepherding days, when the lion, we don't read about it as part of the text earlier on, but he faced lion and bear that was coming and trying to take away the sheep that he was in charge of. And when he fought that, he got this confidence that his God is with him. Normally, we'd look at those situations and say, "Why, God? Why are you putting me through this? Why am I facing all these troubles?" Of course, we are not facing lion and bear in our daily life in Connecticut, I think. Baby bear, that's true. We have a few of them roaming around, but no lion, I hope. I think our daily tasks of working, getting up, the pressures that we face, the stresses that we have are relatable to the lion and the bear. God brings those across our lives to show that we can grab that lion by the hair and strike it, not because of our strength. I'm sure it wasn't because of David's strength. No matter how much weights he lifted, he was not going to kill a lion, that's for sure. This was really God acting through David. And once David realized that, no matter how big this giant, he calls him this uncircumcised Philistine, he has no chance against the living God. And that's the confidence he went with. David's actions were not driven by his desires or circumstances, but by what God said. Your life, my life, are we governed by what God says in the time that we're in the gap of this, as we are transforming into someone? Are we becoming more and more like him because of our circumstances or because of what God said? I would say lean on to what God said. In your notes, it doesn't matter what you see, it matters what God says. God was preparing David's character before giving him the crown. He was teaching him to elevate God's word above his circumstances. With the Spirit of God upon him following the anointing, David was able to fight the enemies of Israel and defeat them. You see in the text as we read, he went and he was just a killer machine. He was just going around killing all these Philistines. Wherever there was an issue, he and his army would just go and kill them all. He had no issues doing that because he was, given the anointing and the power of God was with him. I would say he hit the headlines, like, his newspaper, David, killing people, the hero, etc. In fact, scripture says the women were singing about him. Your local K-Love was running the songs. David and Saul. Saul killed 1,000, David killed 10,000 is what they said. So they have all these things going around. A lot of fame, a lot of praise coming upon David. This is the stage I think God put him through to give him all the success and the praise and to teach him to still be humble. David learned to seek God even during those times of being famous and all the praises around him. God continued to take him through that phase, and now we come to the next phase, which is very soon this whole script flips on him. Saul gets jealous of David and his victory. He sees everyone's, singing about David killing 10,000 people, and people are following David. Saul is becoming less and less of a figure. He's still the king, but he's left behind. So he gets really jealous. He gets angry. He starts trying to kill David. So David now is a fugitive. He's on the run because Saul wants him dead. He goes into these caves and remote parts of the land, and he is there for about 7 years. Can you imagine? I mean, here's a guy who is minding his own business with sheep and stuff, gets oil on him suddenly. Because that, he's now taken from being a shepherd to being in Saul's palace, and he was promoted to being an army leader, and he's commanding a few people. He gets lots of victories, and he's doing his best, and everyone is appreciating everything he's doing. He's so much in the good books of everybody. And now the script flips. He's on the run. He's a fugitive. Rather than taking the throne by force, David trusted God and waited patiently, even sparing Saul's life on 2 occasions. David's understood that the actions driven by worldly fear will never produce godly results. So David decided that he's going to run and then wait it out. If you read some of the Psalms that he's written during that time, you'd think this guy's going to die. He's like screaming out to God, "Why, Lord, why are you letting these things happen to me?" He reaches out to God and says, "Let this end." And yet it took him 7 years. Waiting in those caves, in that remote part of the country, was part of God's preparation. Now, I told you that while he was away, the time that he was in Saul's house, there's something peculiar that happened there. His father, the King Saul, was, getting some remedies because of his music and comforting him. But while he was there, he developed a good friendship with Saul's son, Jonathan. And Jonathan was a brother that he never had. In David's family, his brothers pushed him around, yelled at him, screamed at him. He didn't have a brother that he could really develop a fellowship with. But in that house of Saul, Jonathan, the son of Saul, became his brother. God provided for him. And I think it's important for us to realize that God does not intend for us to walk this path by ourselves. He provides a person for us, or maybe even more, as you'll see later on. But recognizing that God is able to bring people into your life and be a blessing for you is important. And that's why we gather together here. Look around. These are your Jonathans. These are your brothers and sisters. God is putting us together as a community to be able to shoulder one another, to be able to help one another walk this prayer. And it's not easy because it's hard for us to come together and accept each other unless we see God in each other. This person who's sitting next to you, in front of me, you are all images of God. God has got his hand on you. And so when that happens, it's easier to come in here and love one another just the way they are, because God is moving in their life. You can never say where and how and when, or how far you're along this journey, but know this: God is pushing you along towards your goal. I think most of us would relate to, being disgruntled and, angry and sometimes really upset with the system around us. And that's what happened. He got about 400 men who were upset with things that were happening around him. These 400 men joined David in a cave that he was at, and they became his militia. These people all came to David and said, "We will fight with you." And much later, you'll see these 400 people who are really just a ragtag of people, they become his warriors for him. But God provided him an army while he was in those caves. And yet, you see, even when David had a chance to kill Saul, he didn't touch him. He said, "That is God's anointed person. I will not touch him." Later on, we see Saul was killed. Saul and Jonathan were killed in a battle. And after Saul's death, the tribe of Judah crowned David as king. And then he fought another son of Saul's for some time. And after that kid died, he got Israel too. So he then united the kingdom, and he reigned as king over Israel and Judah. Now, this took about 20 years to happen. From the time he was 17 till about 37, God put him in charge of sheep. And then he came to a small army of people. And then he put him in charge of Judah. And then he put him in charge of Israel. God sees what we need at each phase of our life. Are we able to trust him is the question. Are we able to obey him? Are we able to trust him? Promise God made years earlier finally came to fulfill, 20 years later. David's story reminds us of a few things. One is God's promise often involves a season of preparation. Before David wore the crown, he learned faithfulness as a shepherd. He learned to be a servant. He learned to be a soldier and a fugitive. God's timing shaped David into the king Israel needed. David lived a life of obedience and trust because he knew without a doubt that God was sovereign. This is what we need to understand. It's not the big things or the flashy things. It's God in the small day-to-day things for you. Being able to understand and see him there, and then trust, obey, trust, because he is a sovereign God. It's Bible says not one hair falls off your head without his knowledge. David must have it wasn't written then, but I'm sure David experienced that. He would have known that my God has got this. He says in 2 Samuel 7 verse 22, he says, "How great are you, sovereign Lord? There is no one like you. There is no God but you. We have heard with our own ears." Some of you may know this, but I left home in my 4th grade. Probably I was 10 years old, I think. And I was sent to I went to a boarding school. And I pretty much stayed in a boarding school right through my 12th grade. 2 years after I joined the boarding school, so I would see my parents maybe once a year, but 2 years later, my father passed away. So I would look back at that time and I would say, I was really sad that happened. For one, I left home and then he passed away so soon after that. But now when I look back, I see God's fingerprints all over that. It wasn't just about me, it was about my dad too. God had a time for him. God had a purpose for him. And what he did in his last 3 months when he was on earth was amazing for God's kingdom. But what that did to me, how that formed me, how that made me, the boarding school was no fun. We had lots of issues, but that's where God grew me closer to him. In the absence of some comfort of home, I grew closer to God. I began to see God in my day-to-day things. Things when I would miss people, I would turn to God. And an experience that formed me later to say, God is my everything. I don't need to be afraid what comes down the road. I think that's what God's calling us. It's not, God's powerful. He could just make things happen for us. But he chooses to let us walk daily with him, to get to know who he is, to be able to obey, to trust. Why? Because he is a sovereign God. Nothing happens without his knowledge. Let's just pray. Father, we come before you this time and we ask you, Lord, that you would show to us how big you are. Father, talk to us about our circumstances. Each of us has come here today being prepared for something. We are in different phases of our lives, Lord. But we know that you are in it all, that you're weaving the fabric of our life, that you're putting together a daily event so that we can experience you. We learned from your shepherd David and now your King David how much you protected him. Thank you so much that you are here for us, that we can look to you, that we can draw our strength from you, and that as we walk, Lord, in obedience and in trusting that you're sovereign, that every day, Lord, you would shape us more and more like you. Father, give us the grace to see you and others and to love others. And even as we gather together here, help us to be a blessing to others. Thank you again for what you've done for us. We pray and ask all this in Jesus' name. Would you join me? Stand up and we'll praise God.